I bet you thought I was gonna start the video going on and on about how 2020 was a terrible year, and you're right, 2020 was a bundle of shit. But hey, 2020 had some upbeats, like Sephiroth getting announced in Smash, and Crash Bandicoot wearing a mask, which has gotta be like the best thing I've ever seen in my life. Luckily, we had some games to cover the rough patches of 2020, and today we're gonna be ranking the top 10 best games that helped us cope with our world falling apart. Now, of course, keep in mind that this is my personal list. I do consider myself a pretty big gamer, but I am not omnipotent or a basement dweller, so there's a lot of games that I have not played. Because of this, I will dedicate a quick segment later in the video to appreciate critically acclaimed games that I did not play this year. Like Bugsnax, arguably one of the greatest games ever made. I also will not be including ports or remasters in this list, but I will be including remakes. So for example, something like Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated or Mario 3D All-Stars would not qualify. But a remake that's incredibly different from the original counterpart, whether it be in story or gameplay, can qualify, such as Resident Evil 3 Remake. And with all of that being said, let's take a look at the highlights 2020 had to offer.
Take a look at the equipment and prepare accordingly before
Thomas!
What? You're joking. You're kidding.
Kicking it off indie, Basmaphobia was a co-op horror game I didn't know I wanted, but I'm so glad that I got. It came out of nowhere, but it ended up delivering some of the most fun experiences I had this year. Basmaphobia has you in the role of a ghost hunter, using several tools to find a ghost on a haunted ground. And once you find it, you gotta find out what kind of ghost it is. And there's several side objectives to achieve involving the ghost as well. It's the small things that really elevate this game. The proximity chat, the terrifying hunts where ghosts will try to murder you, actually being able to talk to the ghost through your microphone and they will respond back most of the time. And the fact that you can get a ghost named Michael Jackson. There's so much here that makes this experience unique and one of the most memorable horror games I've ever played. It's only lower on this list because it's not particularly the prettiest looking game, or the most functional for that matter. It definitely feels like an indie game. I suspect this game would be much more amazing with up-to-date graphics, and I'm excited for more added content to the game in the future, which I really hope happens because this game has so much potential to be something bigger and greater. Overall, if you can find a couple of friends to play with, this is totally worth a buy. If you know me, you know I am a sucker for literally anything Kingdom Hearts, even if it's a rhythm game that has canon cutscenes that are important to the overarching story. I am officially in Tetsuya Nomura hell, dear god. If I was including DLC in this list, I would have added Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind in this spot, since it added some of the best bosses of the franchise and the genre period. But when it comes to full game releases, we were left with a mobile game that was somehow worse than Union Cross, and a pretty alright rhythm game. Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory takes you through just about all the soundtracks throughout the entire saga, and it's admittedly a nostalgic blast. Melody of Memory was overall a pretty positive experience. It has fun mechanics, great songs, and the story that is here isn't too important, it's just setting up the plot of the next game. It's only like 20 minutes worth of cutscenes, so it's no big deal. It only lands lower on this list because the multiplayer feels unfinished, like you can't even join your friends, which is really dumb. And Kingdom Hearts 3 got snubbed hard in this game. It only has a handful of songs when theoretically it should have quite a bit. But Melody of Memory lands on this list because it's a nice piece of fan service. Cyberpunk 2077 is a weird and sad game to talk about. It should have been in my top 3. It was my most anticipated game of the year. But with its terrible launch with so many bugs that you might as well be playing Bugsnax, the best game ever made, it hurt this game a lot. Like to the extent where I almost didn't put this game on my list at all. But because it's such a great experience when it actually is deciding to work, it does earn a spot on this list. The gameplay for the most part delivers. It has an interesting story with diverging paths and different relationships you can build. Overall, it's a solid RPG experience, like I said, when it is working. If you want a better explanation of my thoughts on the game, be sure to check out my Cyberpunk quick review that I uploaded a couple weeks ago. Animal Crossing New Horizons is another Animal Crossing game I relatively enjoyed, yep. I feel like Animal Crossing New Horizons got a huge boost because of its timing of release, when the coconut virus arrived and we all had to drill our doors shut. Had this game released at any other time, I'm not sure if I would have even gotten it in the first place. I previously had enjoyed Animal Crossing New Leaf on the Nintendo 3DS, but it made me realize Animal Crossing is a game that I play for like 2 months and then never touch again. Which is fine, that's how it goes for most games, but that's one thing I didn't like about Animal Crossing in general, was the feeling of commitment to it. That being said, The time I did spend with Animal Crossing this year was pleasant. I liked going to friends' islands and exchanging things. I liked looking for new villagers and praying to God I got Raymond or Marshall, which didn't happen, by the way. And you know what? There was even some charm that came with going onto a website and waiting for hours to go onto someone's island with high turnip prices. I also enjoyed the relaxation this game provided, which was much needed in 2020. New Horizons was a pretty alright game that arrived at the perfect time. Yes, the game I promised to do a quick review of and never delivered. Sorry about that, by the way. As someone who really likes Breath of the Wild and never really played the original Hyrule Warriors all that much, I like this one quite a bit. Sure, it can get a little repetitive and it's probably a game I'd only play very occasionally, but as I went through the main story, I had little complaints. The fan service in this game was really well handled, even if it's a bit confusing at first. The Divine Beast levels are such a joy to play. It's much fun to demolish hundreds and hundreds of enemies in seconds. And I loved having access to all of these beloved characters, even though I really only used Link and Impa the entire game. Hyrule Warriors was pretty great, but I can only recommend it if you're a fan of hack and slash games or Zelda. God, this game has been destroying my life. I spent 188 hours playing this game in 2020 alone. I can't imagine how many hours I have in it this year already. Genshin Impact, like Basmaphobia, was a game that sort of came out of nowhere, but I am sure glad that it did. Genshin Impact takes the best elements of Breath of the Wild and creates easily the most compelling gacha game I've ever played. It has a rich world to explore, a fairly decent story, and good old gambling. I honestly don't mind the gacha mechanics in this game because they're not nearly as bad as they could be, but I do feel bad for the people who have sunk so much money into this game because I promise you, it's just not worth the $100+ in the end. Genshin Impact is easily one of my favorite action-adventure games to come out in 2020. It only doesn't reach the top because it's still relatively new and there's a lot of things they need to add and improve. The game also can feel kind of chory and grindy once you get caught up with the main story. Once you reach AR45, the game feels like it just becomes grind for materials and artifacts the video game. That being said, they've only released 2 of the 7 regions, so I'm anticipating that this will be a game that will be alive for a while and one that I will be playing for a while as well. 2020 was the year I personally introduced myself to Crash Bandicoot. I played the Insane Trilogy earlier in the year, and it was perfect timing because Crash 4 was announced not long after I had beaten it. And I have to admit, I love the title. The game is literally about time, and it's been a long time coming as well. Crash 4 is one of the more challenging but fun 3D platformers I have played in recent years, and definitely my favorite Crash game. The level variety, the bosses, the different playable characters all add up to a refined Crash experience. The only negatives I could give this game is that the Cortex levels feel a little diluted, and the game asks a lot for completionists, like the amount of gems and other collectibles to acquire and the difficulty of actually getting those collectibles is insane. Trilogy. I'll see myself out now. Spider-Man Miles Morales is Spider-Man again, but better and more snowy. Spider-Man Miles Morales is basically like Uncharted Lost Legacy, but with a lot more exaggerated swag. It takes what made the original so great and just adds more to it. The new Venom powers exclusive to Miles makes you feel so powerful. Insomniac continues to deliver great bosses and missions that made me want to play the game all over again. And I actually did, mainly so I could get the Platinum Trophy. While the game may not be very innovative or necessarily long, it's more of what worked previously, and it makes me very excited to see what they're going to cook up for Spider-Man 2. If Cyberpunk 2077 was my most anticipated game of the year, Final Fantasy VII Remake was a close second. Final Fantasy VII Remake was my first exposure to Final Fantasy VII in general, of course not counting Kingdom Hearts, and I'm really glad that it was because it pushed me to play the original, watch Advent Children, and even play Crisis Core. The game entirely takes place in Midgar, which is crazy because it's only a corner piece of the original game. There's so much to this game I absolutely love. The gameplay is real-time action, but it feels like turn-based because you're able to slow down time to choose your actions. The story is basically the same as the original, just way more detailed, and a lot more characters as well. There's a few changes in the story that I'm not really sure where they're going with them, but I'm sure they're going to explain them a lot more in the future games. The only reason why this game isn't number 1 on my list is because there are a few things I can nitpick that I didn't love about it. For example, I'm not a huge fan of the side quests in this game, and while the game for the most part looks incredibly pretty, there are a few textures here and there that really stick out and are very ugly, especially in the background. All of that said though, this was truly one of the best experiences I had with gaming in 2020, and I'm super ecstatic to see what they're going to be doing in the future, especially with the information that has been coming out recently. Before we get to the number 1 spot, there are a few games I played that I want to give an honorable mention to. They just barely missed the list. The first game is Dreams. It's not really a game, it's more so a game creator, but it was something I ended up enjoying a lot more than I expected. A lot of the creations on there are absolutely remarkable. Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout is next. This is a game that got popular very, very fast, but also lost popularity very, very fast. Although when this game was popular, I really enjoyed it. It was unlike any game I had ever played, and it was one of the few battle royales I genuinely enjoyed playing. The next game is Resident Evil 3 Remake. This game originally was in my top 10, however, I moved it down a little bit because my feelings for this game are a little complicated. I do generally like it though. I would say this is like number 11 on my list. My final honorable mention goes to The Last of Us Part 2. Now, this was probably the most divisive game that came out in 2020. This was like the last Jedi of video games. It was loved by critics, but really hated by fans. Admittedly, I was one of the ones who was disappointed with this game when it came out, especially with the story and writing. That being said, this game does have some of the best acting and graphics I've ever seen in a video game period, and the gameplay was just more of what I loved from the first game, so I don't absolutely hate this game or anything, I just wish it was better. Right quick, before we get to the number 1 spot, I'm going to go ahead and put on the screen games I did not play in 2020, but I heard were very well received by critics and fans. So if you haven't seen your game on this list yet, it probably was a game I just didn't play. But my favorite game of 2020, which is actually kind of surprising, is Ghost of Tsushima. Everything about this game just feels so refined. The combat system is intricately designed, the game map is lively and interesting, and the story was pretty damn good. And the multiplayer that they ended up adding later in the year ended up being a very fun time. Ghost of Tsushima was my first ever quick review, and it ended up being super long because there was so much I wanted to talk about. If anything, my feelings towards this game have only gotten more fond since it released. With so much to love about it, this ended up being my favorite game of 2020. Those were my top 10 games of 2020. What were your favorite games of 2020? Be sure to leave them down in the comments below. Before I go, I just wanted to let you guys know how grateful I am for the growth this channel has been seeing. I literally got 300 subs in like 5 days. It was crazy. I have a lot of video ideas pertaining to gaming, Kingdom Hearts, Danganronpa, and if I'm feeling brave, maybe even anime. If you guys want to see any of this stuff, be sure to continue supporting the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and also be sure to join my Discord for updates on the channel. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. Remember to stay safe and to stay cool. Thanks, guys.